Greetings. Welcome to Live with Lloyd. I am your host, Lloyd Russell. And I want to thank KCAT for sponsoring our show. And today we have Martha Conway, an award-winning author whose most recent book, The Physician's Daughter, just came out in the U.S. about a month ago. So we will talk to her about that as well as a lot of other things. So welcome, Martha. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And let's get to the most important question first. Tell us about your awards and how you got them.
Oh, okay. Well, I suppose the award that I'm proudest of is I was awarded the North American Best Historical Fiction Award for my novel Thieving Forest. And the year after that, the person who won the same award was Anthony Doerr for All the Light You Cannot See.
Wow.
So that was a fun award to get.
Yes, I would think so. Have you gotten others? Did you get an Edgar?
I was nominated for an Edgar Award for my first novel, which is a mystery. The rest of my novels have been historical fiction.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go right into that. What led you to write a mystery? How did you end up switching to historical fiction? And are you going to work in any other kind of genre?
Well, I started with the very first stories that I wrote were more literary fiction. They were short stories. I was sort of teaching myself how to write. And then I got this idea for a mystery. And I feel like I teach also at Stanford's continuing studies program, and I often tell my students writing a mystery is a really good way to learn how to write any novel because it has a certain structure that you have to follow, and you learn a lot about embedding clues and setting things up. So that was my first novel, 12 Bliss Street, a mystery. But I think I always knew that I wanted to write historical fiction. My second novel, Sugarland, was historical mystery, so it was sort of easing myself into the historical world. And then after that was Thieving Forest, and it's been historical fiction ever since then. But I do have to say that the novel that I'm working on now, although it is historical, it has a little bit of magical realism in it.
Oh, wow. So
I'm sort of drifting into that, I think, perhaps. We'll see.
Well, there are so many genres, and at one point, we at our book club, which you graced us with a few years back, we had done something like 35 to 40 different genres. So what genre is magical realism, or is that its own genre, and what does it mean?
Well, probably you ask 5 different writers and you'll get to 10 different opinions, but for me, magical realism just means that it doesn't adhere strictly to realistic terms. So there might be something, an object that has magical properties, or in my case, it's a different world's timeline. It could be any number of things.
What led you to do that?
Well, it's interesting because when I first started out writing, that's what I wrote. My very first short stories always had an element that wasn't quite true to reality. And I couldn't really get any traction. Number one, it wasn't that popular then, except for, of course, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And number two, I don't think I did it very well. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I couldn't do it. So for me, in a way, this is a return to my roots. It was something I was always interested in exploring.
Wow. Well, we've had a couple of authors who have written steampunk, or at least one in particular, but is that a form of magical realism?
These days, all of these genres are so blended, and often you'll say this is steampunk meets magical realism. Steampunk has as you know, it has very definite parameters about what it has to have. But I would say personally, yes, it's a form of magical realism.
Okay. And moving forward, What do you see? What kinds of books do you see writing in the future? I mean, will you incorporate more magical realism and kind of head toward that? Will you stay with historical? Or like this one kind of seems like a tweener?
Yes. So far, I have stayed in the historical context. Most of my ideas are historical fiction, but they might be tweaked a little bit here and there to incorporate, say, magical realism or something else. But everything I write is at least set 50 years ago. And in many ways, that makes things easy for me because, technology and the world is changing so quickly that it's very easy, I think, if you're a fiction writer, to write something that quickly becomes dated. So if you're dated to begin with, it's a little bit easier.
Okay. All right. Books 2 through 4, because we'll get to the physician's assistant in a little bit. What is each one about, with a short synopsis, and how did you get to those ideas to explore?
I just want to interrupt for one moment and say it's the physician's daughter, not the assistant. But I will say it nearly was the physician's assistant, so you're cool.
Thank you for correcting me. I have the title right in front of me.
It's an easy change. I'm sorry. So what was your question again?
Books 2 through 4. Quick synopsis of each and how you came up with those storylines.
Well, 3 of the novels take place in Ohio, which is where I'm from originally.
Okay.
So Thieving Forest takes place in the Great Black Swamp. It's sort of a quest adventure story for women, and it takes place in 1811. And then the Underground River takes place along the Ohio River. So it starts in Cincinnati, Ohio, and then it goes down the Ohio River, and it's about a woman who gets involved in this floating theater. It's literally a barge that is made into a theater and goes down the river playing plays left and right to the little towns along the way.
And I remember it well because that was the one we read for the book club when you came.
That's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Good one.
So, and then this novel, The Physician's Daughter, half of it takes place in Cleveland, and that's where I'm from. And it takes place in 1865, 1866, when Cleveland was an up-and-coming city. John D. Rockefeller makes sort of an off-stage cameo appearance in the book because that's when he was rising to prominence in Cleveland. He later moved to New York. And that was really fun to talk about a bustling industrial city on the rise.
Yeah, that's great. When did The Physician's Daughter come out?
The hardcover came out in January in the UK, and then it came out in September, just this last September in the US.
Wow. Why so many months earlier in the UK when you're here in the US?
I could not tell you. The publisher is in the UK, and that may have been why, but your guess is as good as mine.
All right. Well, here is what The Physician's Daughter looks like. And if any of you want to write in and tell me what an idiot I am for saying the assistant, feel free. So that's that. And you've got something there for book clubs that I think would be real interesting for everybody to see.
Yeah. This is just a very short one-chapter excerpt that I made up for book clubs. I sort of made it so that I'm in a book club myself, and I know that sometimes you're not sure if you want to commit to a book or not, and people might want to read a chapter before they decide. So this is something that I've made up for book clubs. If you think you might be interested in reading the book, just send me an email to mmconway@gmail.com, and I will send you this excerpt for your book club to hand around.
That's great. Do you also zoom in to book clubs around the world?
Yes. I've zoomed into book clubs on the East Coast, on the West Coast, most recently in Pakistan, in the UK. So yes, all over the world.
That's fantastic. All right, so let's go back in history a bit and tell us how you got published with your first book.
Oh, my first book was 12 Bliss Street, and this may date me a bit, but when I sent the manuscript to 5 agents, did it in the mail, sent the whole manuscript in the mail, and 5 days later, 9/11 happened.
Oh, wow.
So, and all of the agents were in New York, and I just thought, wait, I'm just going to wait. I'm not going to do anything for a while. So I waited about 6 months, and of course I didn't hear from the agents, and I didn't expect to. And then I started again, and somebody picked it up right away and found a publisher for it. That was St. Martin's Press, and that was very exciting. That was really fun.
Yeah. And have you stayed with St. Martin's Press for your succeeding books?
No, because that was a mystery, and then I veered into the historical fiction.
Okay. Tell us how you got your first historical fiction published.
The first historical fiction published was, well, the last one that I just did, The Underground River, that was published by Simon & Schuster, and it was also picked up by quite a few publishers in the UK and in Europe. So what happened was the UK publisher offered me a 2-book deal, and so that's why The Physician's Daughter came out with them, as well.
Okay. So you were with Simon & Schuster for just the one book?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then their imprint closed that I was under. It's sort of an interesting journey these days with the publishing houses buying each other up. When I started, the Big 5 was the Big 7. Now it's the Big 3 and possibly the Big 2.
Oh, man.
So one of the things I've really been noticing is a lot of smaller presses cropping up, a lot of hybrid presses. So in some ways, it feels like there are fewer publishers, big publishers for authors, but in other ways, it feels like there are a lot more options in terms of smaller publishers, hybrid publishers, self-publishing. And I tell my students, if you want to write and you want to publish, you actually can now, as opposed to 10, 15 years ago, where if you couldn't find a big publisher to take on your novel, you put it in a drawer and that was the end of it.
Wow. I'm aware of the self-publishing, and I know we've talked to many authors who went the self-publishing route, and some well-known authors, and authors that were New York Times best-selling authors who then went solo. But I didn't realize that there was actually an increase of independent presses. What has led to that, would you say?
Well, I think that the model for the big publishers is hard to maintain. They have offices and rents in New York. There's a publisher, Sourcebook, that is in the Midwest. So right there, they've cut their expenses a lot. There are smaller presses that can operate in somebody's basement. It's just a lot easier to produce a beautiful book these days. So you don't need lots of salaries and high rents in order to do that.
Yeah. So you're currently on a 2-book deal with your UK publisher. Is there also a publisher in the United States that's putting out the same books, the same 2 books?
No, I decided to go with Vassar Books, the UK publisher, for my United States release as well. Okay,
all right. And what will happen after this next book comes out? I mean, will you hope to stay with the UK publisher? Is that a good thing going?
I would love to, yeah. That's I really love my editor. I think she's fantastic. She really helped me make the book a lot better. It's a really nice relationship. So hopefully that will continue.
I know it's always a bit of a up in the air kind of thing for all you guys as you keep going with book after book.
Yeah.
In your teaching, are you teaching them to write short stories? Are you setting them up to be able to write novels? I mean, what do you actually teach them to do?
Yeah, good question. I work in the online writing certificate program, so in my case, it's a novel writing program, and I've taught novel 1, so people who are just starting to write a novel, and I've also taught novel 3, which is people who are midway, trying to figure out, if they should change direction, or, they have some amount of pages under their belt, but maybe need a little help going further. So we talk a lot about, no matter where you are in the process of writing a novel, a lot of the same craft issues still apply. So we will talk about, first person versus third person, and how to set up a scene, characterization, antagonists. That's very big. All sorts of issues.
All right, I'd like to ask you a couple more questions about that. We need to take a quick break. We shall be back shortly with Martha Conway.
Thank you to the City of Montecito for their continued support of KCAT Public Media. The City of Montecito has enabled KCAT to inspire, educate, entertain, and inform our community through the magic of television and digital media for over 38 years. Thank you.
And we're back with Martha Conway. Before the break, we were talking about, your teaching and what you're teaching the kids to do. When they write something, do they give it to you to read? And if it's something long, do you have to read that like a novel type thing?
Yes, they do give me pages. That's part of their assignment. My big thing as a teacher and as a writer is I think that you have to produce pages. You have to write every week. And so I make my students write every week. So that means, of course, I have to read what they write every week. And there's a word limit, maybe 500 words a week, or a scene, maybe 700 words. But I find actually that I learn a lot from my students. They're so imaginative, and analyzing their scenes and what they're doing right and what their challenges are. It just sort of underscores to me what we're all doing when we're writing.
Does it impact your time for writing?
Oh, yes.
So that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's give and take. Usually these classes are 10 weeks long, and I find that in the beginning of the 10 weeks, I can continue to work on my own manuscript. By about week 8, I'm pretty much only teaching the class. So that is definitely a challenge.
Does your publisher give you a certain amount of time to get that first draft in?
They have been very, very kind in terms of
Good.
time. Yeah.
All right. So you're not feeling pressure from the classes to get more time away from them to do your own writing.
Yeah. The only pressure comes from myself because I love to write, so I want to get back to it.
Yeah. How many years between books have you had? And are those optimal time periods for you?
Well, this book took me a long time to write. When I started The Physician's Daughter, Barack Obama was still president. England was still part of the EU.
Wow.
So there was a lot. As you can imagine, it takes place in 1865, 1866. There was a lot of medical research that I had to do. I'm not a STEM person. I'm a literature person, so I did not know a lot about medicine, frankly, or the medicine back then, especially. So there was a lot of research, and for me, when I write, the story sort of writes as I write it. I don't usually have a firm story in mind when I start. I just have a character, a situation. I have some scenes. I know whether or not the character gets what she wants in the end or not. And then from there, the storyline really can go in many directions. So for better or for worse, it takes me a while to figure out exactly what the story is.
Yeah. Well, has the publisher given, you said the publisher's been very good about it, but do you have a time frame for the next book?
I don't really have a time frame for the next book. It feels like it's happening a little bit faster than this one. I mean, also, let's just remember the last 4 years were very disruptive in many ways. So I think a lot of people took a lot of time that they might not have taken otherwise. So, and in addition to that, the publisher, I think wisely, held back the publication of the book a few months because of all the supply chain issues and everything else that was going on.
Yeah, there's a lot of that going on still.
Yeah.
I think we all see it all the time. I have to make a kind of a side comment. I've been writing a book blog for 11 years. I know how hard it is to write 3 paragraphs. I'm just in awe of anybody that can write a novel and have it make sense from beginning to end. It's such an art that you have, and so many others have. So I'm just in awe of what you do.
Oh, well, thank you.
Getting back to the physician's daughter, you obviously knew that you were going to have to do a lot of research for a book that takes place in a field that you're not that knowledgeable about, and 50, 60 years ago. Did you hesitate to start this, or did you know this is something you really wanted to do? And how much research did you do?
Oh my gosh. I have folders, probably 6 or 7 this thick, with, medical research, what society thought about women, what people ate, drank, and dressed like, what Cleveland was like. It starts in a little whaling village in Massachusetts, so a dying whaling village. So what did that look like? There was a lot of research that went into it. I think that once I get hold of an idea, I'm like a dog with a bone. I just have to follow through with it. And sometimes, inevitably, in every process, I feel like throwing up my hands. This isn't going to work. But then, you just keep at it, and somehow you get a little bit of a breakthrough. When I started this novel, I sort of envisioned it as a sort of Grey's Anatomy meets Taming of the Shrew. And I think that's still a fair description. There's a love interest, but there's a woman who has great ambition. She wants to become a doctor, and there are many obstacles in her way. And figuring out what those obstacles were and how she could get around them, that was part of the challenge for me, definitely.
Yeah, it seems like it would be such a difficult thing. So a question for you as an author, for any author. What kind of expectations do you have in terms of the success of the book as you go from one book to the other? Do you expect that each book is going to do a little bit better than the book before it? If it doesn't, is that a disappointment? I mean, how do you even corral that kind of pressure? Mm-hmm. Unless it's no pressure at all.
Well, I have to say that I have come to the point where I really recognize these days that for me the joy is in the writing and the figuring out of the story, and just the craft of writing sentences I've always really liked. So I'm not so much focused on the publications these days. In the beginning, when I was trying to get published, certainly that was a huge focus for me. What am I writing? Is it going to be published? Will people want to read it? Now I sort of feel like people will read it if I make it available to them, and that's all I really want. I don't need to be, a rock and roll international star. I want to write a good book. And if a few people write in and say that they enjoyed reading it, that's just bonus. That's the cherry on top.
Wow. That's so cool. Have you gotten good response for this the new one?
Yes, very good, very good. It seems to be getting really good responses, which just, especially because it took so long and was difficult to write in some ways, it's very heartening.
Do you keep an eye on Goodreads and Amazon for ratings?
Not so much. I mean, it's impossible to avoid, of course, and you have to do a sneak peek. And I do read some of the reviews on Amazon, but I think that's a danger for writers to go down that rabbit hole too far, because you're always going to find people who didn't like one or more of your decisions or didn't like your writing style. It doesn't necessarily mean that the book is bad or that you're not a good writer. But reading a book is very personal. It's not just about the writer and the book. It's a communication with the reader. So the reader brings something to that experience. And that's wonderful. And it's up in the air what that experience is going to be for that person. So I guess what I'm saying is, there are going to be good reviews and bad reviews, but it's all about, this relationship between the reader and the writer.
Wow. There are no books in history that have gotten 5 out of 5 from everybody. So we know about that. And in our book club, we see that all the time. There might be 10, 12 people that have rated it high and one just didn't like it. So and we had that recently. It's just such a personal taste. Also, being a voracious reader myself, I think sometimes it's also, if you're in the mood for that kind of book,
exactly.
You can appreciate the fact that it was written well, but if you're just not in the mood for that genre, then it's going to be tough to rate it high, and it's not the author's fault.
Absolutely. I wish all reviewers understood that.
All right, I'd like to get back to the publisher a little bit. What services do they provide? Now, you've already said that all your publishers so far have been, have picked the title for the book. But what about for the ebook cover and the audiobook narrator? Do you have any input on that?
A little bit, yeah. Usually what happens with the audiobook is they will give me a couple of samples of different voice actors, and I can say which one I like, but they do the initial culling. So there is a bit of that. The cover is really up to them, and I am so happy with that, because I'm not really and I love that cover.
That's a great cover.
So I don't want the stress of having to figure out a cover. I don't think I would do it very well, quite frankly. There are professionals who can do that.
Yeah. Do they do any kind of promotional stuff for you?
Sure. It depends on. It really depends on what they do. For this book, I didn't do any in-person readings in England. I actually went to Ireland and was planning to go to England in February of this year, just after the book was finished, to do some promotions. But when I was in Ireland, I got COVID. Oh. So that had to all be canceled. Now there's a little bit more opening up in terms of in-person events. So I've been fortunate to have a few book readings, both in the Bay Area and back in Cleveland.
Oh, wow.
So that's been nice.
And do you still have family and friends back in Cleveland?
I do. I do have family and friends back there.
Nice excuse to go back
Absolutely.
Anyway. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Have you had any interest, I love to ask this question, from movie or TV studios for any of the books?
I have had some interest. I've had some nibbles. Nothing has come to fruition.
Okay.
Yet.
Yet. Thank you for saying yet. But it's amazing that almost every author that has had a bite of one type or another has not had it actually made. And I've only come across a couple of authors that have had books turned into TV shows or movies. So I think that's. I guess it's really hard for that to take place.
I mean, it's a world that I know nothing about, quite frankly. It seems very mysterious to me.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's about all I've got for today. I think we're pretty much out of time. So this was fascinating. It was great having you here. And I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much, Lloyd. This was really fun.
Great. Okay. All right, guys, that'll do it for us. So we are closing the book on today's podcast. I want to thank KCAT again for hosting us, and it's always great working with all of the people there. And we will see you next time after not after what? What after what? We'll see you next time. And again, thanks to Martha Conway for coming on.
You just heard Lit with Lloyd here on KCAT Radio. Explore all our KCAT original programming at kcat.org/radio.